The judge didn't look at me when she said it, she looked at him, and that was how I knew it was over. I remember the exact moment my life split in two. Not the accident, that I don't remember at all, just flashes, cold pavement, the sound of something giving way that shouldn't have. What I remember is waking up in a room at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto and seeing my husband, Liam, standing at the window with his back to me. He was looking at his phone. Not at me, his phone. I had been unconscious for 11 days. Our daughter, Hazel, was 6 weeks old. I know what you're thinking. You're doing the math. 6 weeks old, and her mother had already been in a coma for 11 of those days. Which means for nearly 2 weeks of my daughter's life, I wasn't there. I was somewhere else entirely, in some gray place between here and gone, while a tiny girl with Liam's nose and my stubbornness was learning to exist in a world I almost didn't come back to. I came back though, that's the thing. I always came back. The accident happened in February. Black ice on the Don Valley Parkway, a transport truck that couldn't stop in time, and a 34-year-old woman, me, who happened to be in exactly the wrong lane at exactly the wrong moment. I'd been driving home from a late shift at the hospital where I worked as a charge nurse on the cardiac unit. I'd worked nights for 3 years because the shift differential helped with our mortgage in Scarborough, because we had a new baby and new expenses, and Liam had just moved firms, and his income was unpredictable for a while. I was doing what I always did, picking up the slack. The transport truck hit the driver's side. My left leg was shattered in 4 places, my pelvis was fractured, I had a bleed on my brain that kept me unconscious while my body decided what it wanted to do with the rest of my life. It decided to keep going, barely, but it decided. When I woke up and saw Liam at the window, my first word wasn't his name. It was Hazel. I asked about Hazel before I asked about anything else, before the pain, before the tubes in my arm, before I even fully understood where I was. "She's fine," he said, and he turned around, and there was something on his face I couldn't name yet. I was too foggy, too full of whatever they had me on. I filed it away for later. I had a lot of things I filed away for later that year. The physiotherapy started in March. A woman named Deb, built like someone who had personally wrestled the concept of giving up and won, showed up every weekday morning at 7:30 and made me move my body in ways it did not want to move. I cried every session for the first month. Deb didn't blink. She'd seen worse, she told me once, and not unkindly. Liam came to the hospital on weekends. He brought Hazel sometimes, and those visits, watching my daughter's face, touching her impossibly small fingers. Those were the only hours I felt like I was still a person and not just a collection of injuries being managed. But he never stayed long. He had excuses that all sounded reasonable. Work, Hazel's schedule, parking was impossible. His mother, Denise, was helping with the baby and she had her own routines. His mother, not mine, my mother, Sandra, drove up from Hamilton every Tuesday and Thursday without being asked. She brought food I couldn't eat yet and sat in the chair beside my bed and talked about nothing in particular. Her neighbor's dog, a recipe she'd seen on television, what was happening with her church group. And somehow that was exactly what I needed. Just her voice, filling the silence, reminding me that ordinary life was still out there waiting. By May I could put weight on my left leg again. Not well, not without the walker, and not without pain that made my vision go white at the edges, but I could stand. I cried when Deb stepped back and let me do it without holding on. "See," she said, "told you." Lem wasn't there that day. I came home in June. Hazel was 5 months old by then. She looked at me the way babies look at strangers, curious but uncertain, not sure yet whether to trust. That landed somewhere under my sternum, and stayed there for months. My own daughter, looking at me like she needed to check her references first. We had a borrowed hospital bed set up in the living room because I couldn't do the stairs yet. Liam had arranged that, at least. He'd moved things around, made space, bought a baby monitor so I could watch Hazel sleep from wherever I was. It was practical and thoughtful and felt, somehow, like the actions of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than someone glad you were home. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself anyone would be exhausted. A new baby, an injured spouse, a demanding job. I told myself to give him grace the way he had to give it to me. I got better at the stairs by August. By September I was walking without the walker, just a cane, just on hard days. Deb had graduated me to outpatient sessions twice a week. I was doing my exercises at home, holding onto the kitchen counter, going slowly, and Hazel would sit in her bouncy chair on the floor and watch me with enormous brown eyes, and I'd talk to her while I worked. "Look at Mama go," I'd say, which is not something I'd have predicted saying before I had a baby. Mama's walking, Mama's doing it. She thought this was funny. She'd make a sound, not quite a laugh yet, and kick her feet. Those moments were the whole world. I knew about the other woman before Liam said anything. I want to be honest about that because I think women often do know, and we spend a long time convincing ourselves we don't, because the knowing is too heavy to carry on top of everything else. Her name was Vanessa. She worked at his firm. I found out the way people find out in 2026, not through a lipstick collar or a late-night phone call, but through the particular carelessness of someone who has stopped worrying about being caught. A notification on his iPad that he'd left on the counter. A name I didn't recognize. A message that had no business existing. I confronted him on a Wednesday evening in October. Hazel was asleep. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my cane hooked over the back of the chair and my hands flat on the table because I needed something solid to hold on to. He didn't deny it. What he said was, "I didn't plan for any of this," which is the kind of sentence that sounds almost like an apology if you don't listen too carefully. I asked him how long. He said a few months. I did the math quietly. The way you do when you already know the answer, but you're hoping the numbers will come out different. They didn't. It had started while I was still in hospital, while I was learning to breathe without machines. While my mother was driving up from Hamilton, twice a week because my husband was too tired to visit. I said that out loud. He looked at the floor. He moved out before the end of the month. He took his clothes, his work things, his record collection, that I'd always thought was pretentious anyway. He did not take Hazel because I don't think it occurred to him to fight for her right then. She was 9 months old, and she woke up 3 times a night, and she needed someone who was actually present. And he had Vanessa and a new apartment in Liberty Village, and a version of his life that didn't include either of us. I was 34 years old, walking with a cane, nursing a baby, and more alone than I had ever been. I made tea. I sat down. I looked at my daughter sleeping on the monitor. "Okay," I said to the empty kitchen. "Okay." The months after Liam left have a texture I can only describe as gray-bright. Hard, sometimes brutally hard, but full of small lights. My mother moved in for 3 months. My brother Kevin, who lives in Mississauga, took Hazel on Sunday afternoons so I could rest or exercise or just sit somewhere without noise. My colleagues at the hospital, I'd gone back to work part-time in January, a different unit, lighter physical requirements, desk-heavy, covered for me more times than I could count. The child support arrangement was sorted through lawyers. Liam paid regularly, I'll give him that, though the amount felt abstract against the reality of Toronto childcare costs, and a mortgage and the ongoing physio bills not covered by my benefits. He saw Hazel on weekends, every other one, initially, and she went to him without much fuss, which I tried to be grateful for even when it stung. As she grew, the visits became less regular. Not dramatically, not all at once, just erratic. He'd cancel sometimes. Not often enough to be legally significant, often enough to be pattern. Hazel got used to the uncertainty in the way kids do, which is to say she absorbed it into herself without having language for it yet. She had language for a lot of things by the time she was 3. She was talkative and sharp, and she had opinions about everything, which I suspect she gets from me. She called her grandmother's Sandra Baba, which made my mother cry the first time, happy tears, and she called her stuffed rabbit Mr. Whiskers even though it was clearly a bear, and she called her father Daddy Liam, as if she needed the surname to be specific about which one she meant. Which I suppose she did because she'd grown up knowing Kevin as Uncle Kev and her grandfather as Grandpa Bill, and the word daddy on its own had never felt quite permanent. I started back full-time when Hazel was 2.5. I walked without the cane by then on most days. My left knee still talked to me in cold weather, and probably always would. But I was back. I was me again, or some new version of me that had been built from the same material, but put together differently. The years had a rhythm. Work, Hazel. The small renovations I did to the Scarborough house 1 room at a time, because I found I liked doing things with my hands. Kevin's kids and Hazel growing up like cousins, Christmas at my mother's in Hamilton, summer weeks at the rented cottage near Parry Sound that became our tradition starting when Hazel was 4. Parent-teacher nights, school plays, the particular exhaustion of homework battles, the particular joy of watching a child learn to read and watching her face when the words stopped being mysterious and started being doors. Liam faded in and out. There were periods, a year here, 18 months there, where he was more present, more consistent. Vanessa left him eventually. I heard through the particular Toronto grapevine that consists mostly of mutual acquaintances and LinkedIn updates. He dated someone else after that, and then someone else again. He was, I think, better at starting things than at maintaining them. He and Hazel had a relationship. I want to be fair. It was thin in places, inconsistent in others, but it existed. She spent time with him. She knew his face and his. When she was 7, she went through a phase of making him drawings at school that she'd then forget to give him, and they'd pile up on her desk and I'd find them sometimes. Colored pencil portraits of a man who was unmistakably him, labeled Daddy in 7-year-old handwriting. I always put them in an envelope and brought them to the next exchange. He usually said thanks. Hazel was 10 when Liam remarried. Her name was Christine. I learned this from Hazel, who came home from a weekend visit with the news delivered in the same tone she used to report on school lunch, factual, slightly bored, waiting to see how I'd react. I said that was nice. I asked if she'd liked Christine. She's okay, Hazel said. She laughs too loud. I said that some people just had big laughs. Hazel considered this and said, hers sounds fake. I did not say anything to that. I busied myself with dinner. Hazel was 11 when Christine had a baby, a boy, Felix. I know because Hazel told me, and because Liam sent me a text that said, just wanted to let you know we've had a son, everything's fine, which I thought was a strange combination of considerate and bizarre. What was I supposed to do with that information? But I said congratulations, because I wasn't sure what else to say, and I meant it in some distant, abstract way. Hazel went through a complicated few months after that. She'd come home from visits quieter than usual, and I'd find her sometimes sitting in her room just looking at the wall. When I asked, she'd say she was fine, and the way she said it, not dramatically, not angrily, just flatly, was harder than if she'd cried. One evening I sat on the edge of her bed and didn't say anything for a while, just sat, and eventually she said, Felix is so little. Daddy keeps wanting to show me things about him, how he holds things, what sounds he makes. I waited. She stopped. Started again. Daddy never talked about me like that. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I said, you matter. You have always mattered. She looked at me like she was checking to see if I meant it. I met her eyes and held them. Okay, she said finally. Just like that. Okay, the letter from Liam's lawyer arrived on a Monday, March. Hazel was 12. I stood at the kitchen counter and read it twice, because the first time my brain refused to process it as real. It was a formal application for a variation of the custody order. A request for primary residence to be changed, meaning Hazel would live primarily with Liam and Christine, with me having access on alternating weekends. The stated reason was that he felt Hazel's needs were better served in a 2-parent household. I put the letter down, I put the kettle on. I stood at the window looking at the backyard, the one I'd dug up and planted myself, the one Hazel and I had put tomatoes in every summer since she was 5, and I breathed. Then I called my lawyer. My lawyer's name was Priya. She had represented me through the original divorce, and I'd kept her number ever since in the specific way you keep the number of someone you hope never to call again. She picked up on the second ring, and I told her what had happened, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in a very even voice, all right, let's talk about what we have. What we had, it turned out, was quite a lot. 11 years of school records, teachers who knew Hazel's name and who to call and who showed up to every meeting. A pediatrician, Dr. Anand, who had been seeing Hazel since she was 3 months old, and who had clear documentation of every appointment, every concern addressed, every follow-up arranged, all by me. Proof of the cancellations on Liam's end because I had kept records, not to be spiteful, but because I am a nurse and nurses document everything. Dates, times, reasons given, 12 years of it. Priya looked at my binder. I had brought an actual binder, tabbed and organized because that is who I am. And she said, almost to herself, he has no idea what he's walking into. I also had Hazel. In Ontario at 12, a child's expressed preferences carry significant weight. Not absolute weight. The court still looks at the full picture, but real, considered weight. The court can hear from a child directly, or through a report by the office of the children's lawyer, who assesses what the child wants and why. Hazel, when I finally sat down and explained to her what was happening, because she deserved to know. Because she was 12 and not a baby, and pretending otherwise would have been a different kind of failure. Looked at me with those enormous brown eyes that had been looking at me since she was 5 months old and learning to trust strangers. She said, he wants me to live with them? I said yes. She was quiet for a long moment, then she said, did anyone ask me? The proceedings took 8 months. I won't pretend they were easy. There were days when I sat in Priya's office or in my car in the hospital parking lot and felt something that was part grief, part fury, part sheer bewildered exhaustion, that this was what my life had come to. Fighting in a courtroom for my own daughter. The daughter I'd brought home and raised and stayed up with at 3 a.m. and taken to every dentist appointment and every swimming lesson and held when the nightmares came and helped with the science fair project that involved an unfortunate amount of vinegar. Liam's lawyer made arguments about stability and family structure, about the benefits of 2 parents in the home, about Christine's availability as a full-time caregiver. Priya let them finish. Then she started going through the documentation. How many of Hazel's medical appointments had Liam attended in the last 5 years? She read from Dr. Anand's records. The number was 3, total, in 5 years. How many school events? The vice principal, a steady woman named Ms. Pemberton, who I had coached through several difficult parent situations and who clearly had very little patience for nonsense, had provided a written statement. She listed the concerts, the curriculum nights, the parent-teacher conferences. Liam had appeared at 2 events. I had appeared at all of them. How many times in the past 3 years had Liam cancelled scheduled access visits? Priya read the dates from my binder. 14 times, some with notice, some without. Liam's lawyer objected that these were individual circumstances, that there were explanations, that account doesn't capture context. The judge, the Honorable Justice Beaumont, who had the face of a woman who had heard every possible argument and developed strong opinions about most of them, made a note and said, "I'll take that into consideration." Then the report from the office of the children's lawyer was entered. The lawyer assigned to Hazel, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Arsenal, had spent 3 sessions with her over the course of the proceedings. He had also spoken to her teachers, her grandmother Sandra, her doctor, and her uncle Kevin. His report was 11 pages. Liam's own lawyer looked uncomfortable when it was entered. Mr. Arsenal, reading from his summary, stated that Hazel had been clear, consistent, and thoughtful in her expressed wishes. That she understood the decision in front of the court. That she had said, across multiple conversations, that she wanted to continue living primarily with her mother. And then he read the part that I will never forget. He said that when he had asked Hazel to describe what home meant to her, she had said, "Home is wherever my mum has her garden." He said that when he had asked her to explain that further, she had said that her mother had planted a garden when Hazel was little, even though walking was hard for her then, and that they'd planted it together every year since, and that she knew her mother had done hard things to make their life good. And she said 11 pages of careful professional language, and it came down to this: that she didn't want to leave a person who had never left her. The courtroom was very quiet. I looked at my hands on the table. I was not going to cry. I had promised myself I was not going to cry. I cried anyway. Justice Beaumont didn't rule from the bench that day. She took several weeks to issue her written decision, which is standard. But when it came, it was unambiguous. The application to vary primary residence was dismissed. The existing arrangement was maintained with modifications. Access schedule for Liam adjusted. Provisions for Hazel's schedule as she moved into high school. A note in the decision that the court expected both parents to prioritize consistency. There was a line in the decision that Priya highlighted for me when she sent the PDF. It said, "The evidence before this court demonstrates that the applicant, while having legal parental status, has not borne the primary responsibilities of parenting in practice. The child's expressed preference, supported by independent assessment and corroborated by extensive documentation, reflects a considered attachment to her primary caregiver. The court finds no basis on which a variation would serve the child's best interests." Legal language. Dry and procedural. But I read it 5 times sitting in my car in the Tim Hortons parking lot on Kingston Road. I read it until it stopped feeling like words and started feeling like air. Liam called me that evening. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. He didn't say much. He said he was sorry for how it had happened. He said, and I believed him, which surprised me, that he knew he hadn't been there the way he should have been. He said he hoped Hazel would still want to know him. I said that was up to Hazel, but that I had never, not once in 12 years, said a negative word to our daughter about her father. That I had given her every drawing she'd made for him. That I had encouraged her to call him even when she'd needed nudging. That I had done all of that because she deserved a father, even if the father she had was imperfect. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I know you have." That was not nothing. That was actually something. Hazel is 15 now. She's in grade 10 at the school 2 blocks away, studying French and taking photography as an elective because she has my eye for composition, which I am not above being smug about. She and Liam see each other most months. It's not perfect. Nothing about this has ever been perfect. But she goes and she comes home, and she tells me about Felix, who is apparently wild and funny and obsessed with dinosaurs. She got her own plant last spring. A tomato, because obviously. She set it up in a pot on her bedroom windowsill, and she texted me a photo from school one afternoon that said only, "First tomato is coming in," with 3 exclamation marks and a small, blurry photo of something definitely green. I stood in the kitchen and looked at my phone and felt something that didn't have a name, or maybe had several names at once. Pride. Relief. Love in the particular form it takes after years of effort, when it becomes less like a feeling and more like bedrock. My knee ached from the cold that day. It does that sometimes. I didn't mind. I never really mind.